everyone, again good morning. I am Rose Pearl Peralta from BSED English 3-1 and I will going to discuss one of the approaches to language teaching, which is the communicative approach in second language teaching. Let us first define and give example to the communicative approach before we proceed to the proponents of different communicative competence. So, communicative approach is also known as the communicative language teaching or the CLT. According to Richards, 1997, communicative approach in language learning is an approach that is used in learning the second language or foreign language that emphasizes on the improvement of communicative ability. That is the ability of applying the language principle in order to produce grammatical sentences and understand when, where, and to whom the sentences used. And of course, to accomplish this aim, teachers are first and foremost required to be familiar with the core concepts of communicative competence. On the other definition, according to Richards, Jack C. and Rogers, Theodore 2001, communicative method focuses on language as a medium of communication. It recognizes that communication has a social purpose, learner which has something to say or find out. Communication embraces a whole spectrum of functions and notions, meaning that communicative language teaching or the CLT is a learner-centered approach to prepare students to be confident communicators for different real-life contexts through the oral practices and student-student cooperation. That is why they are expected to participate in the communication process actively in the classroom. Because the more responsibility to participate, the more the possibility that students may gain confidence in a way that they are able to express their opinions, share their feelings and idea in using the target language and be able to achieve communicative competence. Because the new language system will be best learned by struggling to communicate one's own meaning and by using notion of meaning through interaction with others. Of course, when learners are involved in real and meaningful communication, their natural strategies for language acquisition will be used, and this will allow them to learn to use the language. So some of the sample learning activities that we can use are interactive language games, information sharing like experiences, unforgettable moments, and so on, task-based social interaction like role-playing and debate inside the classroom, and functional communication. The phrase communicative competence was first coined in 1967 by the American sociologist and anthropologist Dale H. Himes in reaction to Chomsky's notion of linguistic competence. He defines communicative competence as what enables a member of the community to know when to speak and when to remain silent, which code to use, when, where, and to whom. Since then, the concept has developed over years and different models of communicative competence have been offered by different scholars. Until such time that in 1980, we had arrived with the first model by Canale and Swain in 1980, and it was further expanded by Canale in 1983. This model represented an integral theoretical framework consisting of four main competencies: the grammatical competence, social-linguistic competence, strategic competence, and the discourse competence. So, let's deal with the grammatical competence first. When we say grammatical competence, it is the first component of the model. It refers to the knowledge of the language code. It includes knowledge of vocabulary, rules of pronunciation and spelling, word formation, and sentence structure. So technically, it focuses on the grammar itself. On the other hand, we have the social-linguistic competence. It refers to the knowledge of the social-cultural rules of use in a particular context. So in this part, this is where the function will come in and in the context itself. And for the third one, we have strategic competence. It involves the knowledge of how to use verbal and nonverbal communication strategies to handle breakdowns in communication. So let's say that the message was not clearly conveyed by the speaker or the listener. So the speaker must have the ability to repair the inevitable miscommunication that frequently arise during the interaction. So for the last component, we have the discourse competence. The last component of the model and is concerned with the knowledge of achieving coherence and cohesion in a spoken or written text. How unified your thoughts, how clear it is, how accurate would be the information that would be coming from you or from a spoken or a written text. So that is the role of the discourse competence. So another model came from Savignon in 1983. Her model, which included the same four competencies already mentioned, the grammatical competence, social-linguistic competence, and the likes, those four adopted the shape of an inverted pyramid to show how an increase in only one component produces an increase in the overall level of communicative competence. It's just like an automatic increase, even just one that would be improved, since all the components are interrelated to each other. That's according to Savignon in 1983. And this assumption is supported by the fact that a measure of both social-linguistic and strategic competencies without any knowledge of grammatical competence can contribute to increase someone's communicative competence. That is, without the use of language, a person can communicate through gestures or facial expressions. Let's say the message can still convey or it can be understood by the listener or by another person. It's an improvement of the previous model, which is the Canale and Swain model of grammatical, social-linguistic, strategic, and discourse competence. It was just an inverted pyramid with the belief that they are all interrelated. And then by 1987, another model came in by Batchman. Batchman developed a model of communicative language ability in which three components were included: the language competence, strategic competence, and psychomotor skills. While back, Canale and Swain, we have four components, and this time around, as you can see, we have three components: the language and strategic and the psychomotor skills. With the language competence, the first one in this model, it is divided into two subcomponents. We have the organizational and pragmatic competence. But with the organizational, we still have other divisions. We have the grammatical and the contextual competence, whereas for pragmatic competence, we can still divide into illocutionary and social-linguistic competence. When we talked about organizational competence, which is under the language competence, it consists of grammatical and textual competence, which are comparable to Canales 1983 and Savignon 1983 concepts of grammatical and discourse competencies respectively. So it's just had different name and it's a combination of them. Under the pragmatic, we have the illocutionary competence, which refers to the knowledge of the pragmatic conventions for performing acceptable language function, whether it need to be impose something and the like. Then we have the social-linguistic competence, which deals with the knowledge of the social-linguistic conventions for performing language functions appropriately in a given context. For the social-linguistic competence, this last competence thus is similar to one proposed by Canale and Swain in 1980 and Savignon in 1983. Although for these authors, social-linguistic competence was considered to be one of the four main components, while in Batchman, in this model, it includes within pragmatic competence. Batchman in 1987 and 1990 also consider two more components of communicative language ability, namely strategic and psychomotor skills, or the psychological mechanism. The former allows language users to employ the elements included within language competence depending on the context in which communication takes place in order to negotiate meaning. So, while the other one was the receptive or productive mode in which competence is performed through particular type of channel, oral or visual in the case of receptive language use, and oral or visual in the case of productive language use. After Batchman, a few years later, Selsemurcha, Dorney, and Turrell in 1995 presented a detailed model of communicative competence in which the authors not only incorporated pragmatic competence under the name of actional competence, so we now have here the actional competence, and the receptive and productive skills within discourse competence, but it is also highlighted the connection existing among these components, together with the linguistic, social-cultural, and strategic competences that go to the make-up such a model. In short, it concerns the selection of sequencing of sentences to achieve a unified text, whether spoken or written, like how it presented a while ago. And then, linguistic competence teach the basic elements of education such as sentence patterns, morphological inflections, phonological sentences such as lexical resources. In the linguistic competence, we might find ourselves thinking about grammatical competence. Yes, it is like this. It's just that it came from a different proponent. While discourse competence concerns the selection and sequencing of sentences to achieve a unified text, whether it be spoken or written. While linguistic competence entails the basic elements of communication, such as, like what I said a while ago, sentence patterns, morphological inflections, phonology, and lexical resources, like formulaic construction, collocations, or phrases related to conversational structure. And then, we have the social-cultural competence, which refers to the speaker's knowledge of how to express appropriate messages within the social and cultural context of communication in which they are produced. In this sense, these constitute is related to Canale and Swings in 1980, Savignon's in 1983, and Batchman's in 1990 social linguistic competence. So you see, they're all interrelated. It's just that they are being improved. In fact, in Savignon's revised model in 2001, social linguistic competence is also termed as social-cultural competence in a similar way to that of Selsemurcha, Dorney, and Turrell in 1995. Here we have the term actional competence, as you hear a while ago. It involves, or the actual actional competence involves the understanding of the speaker's communicative intent by performing and interpreting speech accents. Finally, these four components are influenced by the last one, the strategic competence, which is concerned with the knowledge of communication strategies and how to use them. In short, this model thus provides a clear picture of the interrelationship among all the components. However, with regard to the function they assign to strategic competence, or our view is that this competence should be placed at the same level as the rest of the competencies, since its aims is to build discourse competence while allowing communicative ability to develop parallel to the other components. We have now Alcon in 2000 who also proposes another model of communicative competence. But then as you observe, the models are somewhat related, and this time around, Alcon's model is a hybrid of the models proposed by Bachmann in 1990 and Murcia, Dorney, and Turrell in 1995. In here, just like Bachmann in 1990's model, communicative competence consists of three main sub-competencies that are interrelated to each other, namely discourse competence, psychomotor skills and competence, and strategic competence. When we talk about discourse competence in here, it's the core of the communicative competence in the line with the model put forward by Murcia, Dorney, and Turrell in 1995. And it is in turn broken down into the three constituent of linguistics, textual, and pragmatic competence components rather. Whereas linguistic competence, it refers now not only to grammatical knowledge but to all aspects of the linguistic system, including those lexical resources such as formulaic speech. The textual and pragmatic constituent are necessary for the construction and interpretation of discourse, and in this sense, pragmatic competence is similar to Murcia, Dorney, and Turrell's action competence. As far as the psychomotor skills and competencies are concerned, Alcon 2000 suggests that discourse competence influences the ability of listening, speaking, reading, and writing, which are interrelated in order to use the language for communicative purposes. Finally, strategic competence includes both communication and learning strategies, thus widening the conceptualization of all strategic competence proposed in the model by Murcia, Dorney, and Turrell in 1995, which only consider the knowledge of communication strategies and how to use them. There are three aspects of Alcon's in 2000 model that are of particular interest. The first one is the discourse competence is the core of the model. 2. An explicit function is given to the four psychomotor skills, which are the speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And number 3 is strategic competence is an important component in its own right that incorporates both communication and learning strategies. According to Cortese and Jean in 1999, culture can be regarded as a wide framework of values, beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors that are used to subjectively interpret other people's action and patterns of thinking. This is aligned with the idea that Alcon's model would be missing the idea that language is also culture-bound, and this is why some other experts would claim that it should be able to remember that it is essential and important to foreign language learning to become aware with the different cultural aspects if they are to make an appropriate interpretation of the target language. Because remember, language and culture are always related, which is why there might be some miscommunication that will happen if you will not consider the culture. For this reason, in order to foster second language learners' knowledge of the skills required to be successful in intercultural communication, the development of intercultural communicative competence should be included within a communicative approach for second language teaching. By this time, we are now evolved from the environment approach to innatist approach to interactionist approach, and then with the communicative competence, here comes the intercultural communicative competence, which will be integrated to the second language teaching. This competence has been defined by Mayer in 1991 as the ability of a person to behave adequately in a flexible manner when confronted with actions, attitudes, and expectations of representatives of foreign cultures. In fact, Byram in 1997 proposed a model of intercultural communicative competence given the need to integrate the teaching of intercultural communicative skills as part of classroom instruction. In this component, you have to take a note that it's not just about grammar. It's not how you or we use the language in a sentence or what. The intercultural communicative competence would also include social and cultural sensitivity. Remember that the language is a tool or medium for communication.